Feel the neon pulse of a world where every flickering light represents a choice, a chance, or a secret. We capture the high-stakes drama of the streets through a cinematic lens of glowing colors and deep shadows. Subscribe today and keep your finger on the pulse of the night.
At Thanksgiving dinner, in front of 11 relatives, my father stood from the head of the table and told the room he was done, watching me use my illness as an excuse to let the family down. He didn't say it quietly, he said it the way he said everything. With the full weight of a man who had never once in his life been wrong about anything. He looked at my pill organizer sitting next to my water glass and said, "Put that away, we're not at a pharmacy." My mother nodded. My brother laughed into his napkin. I was 29 years old, 3 months out of a lupus flare that had kept me horizontal for 6 weeks, and I had just driven 4 hours from Chattanooga to my parents' house with a casserole dish in my back seat, and a folder of their business's quarterly tax documents that their accountant had forwarded to me, because, as he'd told me 8 months earlier, "You're the only one who knows what any of this means." I put the pill organizer in my purse. I sat very still and I thought, they have no idea what this dinner is about to cost them. My name is Sabine, and I have to tell you the part that comes before, because the part that comes before is the whole reason the rest of it worked. My father built his landscaping company from nothing. At least that's the version he tells. Carmody Grounds. 22 years, a fleet of 4 trucks, seasonal contracts with 3 commercial properties and a school district. He is proud of it, the way men get proud of things when they've forgotten how much of the work was done by other people. I was the other people. Not with a shovel. But somebody had to keep the books. Somebody had to rebuild the payroll system. When the old one imploded in 2018, somebody had to call the IRS when the company fell 2 years behind on quarterly filings because my father believed, with the full conviction of a man who had never been audited, that taxes were more of a suggestion than a legal requirement. That somebody was me. I was 25 when I started doing the books. My father asked me to take a look at a pile of invoices he'd been storing in a laundry basket in the garage. I was 2 years into a financial analyst position at a logistics firm, living 20 minutes away, still close enough that Sunday dinners felt manageable. I took a look. I found $34,000 in unfiled receipts, a payroll error that had been miscalculating withholding for 11 months, and a business checking account that was technically overdrawn but hadn't triggered a fee because someone had linked it to my parents' personal savings without telling anyone. I didn't say anything dramatic. I opened a laptop, built a spreadsheet, and started sorting. My father stood in the kitchen doorway watching me work and said, "See, this is what I mean. You've got a head for this." He said it like a compliment. I took it like one. That was the first Sunday. I came back the next one, and the one after that. 4 years later, I was the authorized representative on the company's IRS payment agreement. I filed the quarterly estimates. I handled the commercial property contract parts because my father's handshake and a smile approach had nearly cost him the school district account in 2021. And someone had to write a professional email at 11 at night to a facilities director who was this close to pulling the contract. I was the someone. I always was. I also paid out of my own account, not a wage that would have required them to acknowledge I was doing work. I mean, I covered shortfalls personally. When the IRS back payment plan came to $340 a month, I set up auto-pay from my personal checking because the business account didn't have enough cushion. When a vendor threatened to pull equipment during peak season over a $2,200 invoice my father had misplaced, I paid it myself and called it a loan I never once mentioned again. By the end, I was putting in roughly $1,400 a month, quietly, on auto-pay, under a line item no one in my family ever looked at twice. Because looking at it would have meant thanking me, and thanking me would have meant admitting I was the one holding the floor up. My brother was the one holding the floor up. That's the story my family told. My brother drove the truck sometimes. He showed up to job sites long enough to take photos. He posted them on the Carmody Grounds Instagram, himself in a work shirt, hand on a client's fence post, squinting into the sun like a man who'd built things with his bare hands. He got 50 likes. He called himself operations manager on LinkedIn. He told people at parties that he'd grown up in the family business and kept it going through some tough years. He didn't know the company's EIN. I know this because when the IRS correspondence started arriving and I needed him to handle one form while I was in the hospital, the first flare, the one that lasted 8 days, I had to text him the account number, the username, the password, the name of the payment coordinator, and a line-by-line explanation of what to do. He did not do it. He texted back, "This is a lot. Can this wait?" Couldn't wait. I did it from the hospital on a laptop my husband brought me, still hooked to an IV, because a missed payment would have voided the agreement and cost my father $8,000 in penalties. I don't tell that part often. I'm telling it now because it explains everything that came after. Lupus announces itself differently for everyone. For me, it started as exhaustion so complete it felt structural, like the bones themselves were tired. Then the joint pain. Then a flare that my rheumatologist told me was, in his clinical opinion, consistent with prolonged stress exposure. He looked at my blood work and my schedule and said it. The way doctors say things when they're delivering information the patient already suspects. Whatever you've been carrying, you need to set some of it down. I nodded. I drove from his office to my parents' house and filed the quarterly estimates that were due the next morning. My mother said the right things at first. Soup, once. She told my aunt my condition was serious but manageable, which was true, and also was the framing that made it least disruptive to everyone's existing assumptions. By the end of that first year, the lupus had been quietly reclassified, in the family's shared mythology, as something I was leaning into. My father used the word sensitive about me at a dinner, and my mother nodded the way. She nodded at everything he said, and my brother said something about how some people handle stress differently, and someone changed the subject. I kept doing the books, I kept paying the auto pay, I kept being the name on the IRS correspondence. I almost didn't go to Thanksgiving. I sat in my car in my own driveway for 20 minutes, the engine running, the heater on, because my joints do not like November. I had a flare threatening at the edges, nothing I could prove to anyone, nothing visible, just the particular heaviness I'd learned to read the way you learn to read weather. I told myself I could turn around at any light between my apartment and their house. I didn't. There was still a part of me that showed up, hoping my father would look at me differently this year. That part of me had been wrong before, and it kept showing up anyway. The house was warm and smelled like the same candle my mother burns at every holiday. My aunt and uncle were there, 2 cousins from her side, my father's brother and his wife, my brother and his girlfriend, and my grandmother, who is 81 and says exactly what she thinks and had already told me privately, in the kitchen, while the turkey rested, that I looked tired and that she hoped I was taking care of myself. I noticed 3 things before dinner that I would remember later. The first was a piece of paper on the kitchen counter, a printed email, face down, my name visible at the top edge. My mother saw me see it and moved a fruit bowl in front of it without a word. The second was the way my brother held court at the table before we sat, talking about a new client he'd landed. A corporate park contract I had spent 11 emails and 2 phone calls in October securing from my apartment while he was at a fantasy football draft. He told it like a story about himself. Nobody at that table had any reason to think it wasn't. The third was my grandmother's face when she watched me take my evening medications at the table. The quiet acknowledgement in her eyes, the small nod. Like she was the only person in the room who understood what it cost me to be there. We didn't make it to dessert. My father had tested the water earlier, the way he always did. When I mentioned my rheumatologist had suggested adjusting my hours during bad flares, he'd said loudly enough for the table, "If I took a day off every time my back hurt, we'd have lost the company in year 1. A few people chuckled. I let it go. I had been letting things go for years, and because of that, he had learned there was no line I would actually defend. He set down his fork. The table quieted. "I'm going to say something," he said, "and I'm saying it because I love you." He looked at me. "You have been using this illness as a reason to pull back from this family for 2 years, and we've been walking on eggshells, and I'm done." I said his name. He didn't stop. "Your brother shows up. He is there. Whatever's going on with your health, there's always something going on, and meanwhile, your brother is running this company and keeping this family together. And you're—" He gestured at my water glass, at my untouched plate. "Managing. And the rest of us are managing around you." My mother spoke before I could. Her voice was calm in the way of something rehearsed. "We love you, Sabine. We just need you to meet us halfway. You're almost 30. You can't let one diagnosis become your whole personality." I looked at my brother. He was cutting his turkey. He didn't look up, but the corner of his mouth did something that wasn't quite a smile. My grandmother said, "That is enough." Nobody listened to her. And then, someone, I still don't know who, said, "Maybe if you pushed yourself a little more," and that sentence floated over the table and nobody contradicted it. And the room took it as permission to breathe again, and the conversation started to move on. I want to be precise about what I felt, because the calm that came next was real, but it was not empty. My hands were flat on the tablecloth. My joints were aching in that low warning bell way. And I understood, with a clarity that had been building for 4 years, that this family had decided who I was going to be, and that no amount of quarterly filings or midnight emails or $1,400 auto payments was going to change that assignment. So I stopped trying to change it. I took out my phone. My father was still talking. My brother had started talking too, something about spring contracts. I opened my banking app and found the auto pay schedule. 2 recurring transfers to the company account. I canceled both. It took 45 seconds. Then I opened my messages and sent a text I had written and saved 3 weeks earlier, on a night when I'd sat in my car in their driveway and understood this moment was coming even if I hadn't fully admitted it to myself. The message went to my CPA, not my family's, mine, the one I paid myself. It requested she remove me as authorized representative on the company's IRS payment plan and have my name taken off the account's secondary contacts by end of business Monday. I set the phone face down next to my untouched cranberry sauce. I folded my hands and I waited. My father didn't notice. He was on a roll now. Responsibility, legacy, the company my grandfather had believed in. I watched the clock on the microwave through the kitchen doorway. 4 minutes and 50 seconds later, his phone rang. He glanced at it, saw a number he half recognized, and answered it with his regular voice. The man in charge voice. "Hello?" I couldn't hear the other end. I didn't need to. I watched it land on his face the way weather changes a field. First the stillness, then the shift. The loan servicer. Automated alert about a missed auto payment. Would he like to speak with a representative? What payment? His smile was still there, but it had gone stiff at the corners. He listened. "No, we have auto pay set up." He listened again. "What do you mean it was canceled today?" His eyes came up and found mine across the table. He put his hand over the phone. He looked at me with something in his face that was not quite anger and not quite understanding, somewhere between the two. "Why is your name on our business loan?" he said. The table went very still. That question, 4 years overdue, finally sat in front of 11 people who had spent 4 years not asking it. I said, because I've been the one paying it. Nobody moved. He went back to the phone. I heard him try to sort it out. I heard him fail. The representative explained patiently that the authorized account holder had canceled the recurring transfer and that a payment was now overdue and that the company's next scheduled quarterly would need to come from a different source. He hung up. My brother put down his fork. My father looked at my brother. My brother looked at his plate. My father looked back at me, and what was in his face then was not triumph and not anger. It was something older and more frightened, the face of a man who has just understood that the floor he was standing on belonged to someone else. We'll talk about this, he said. I said we can talk about it now. We didn't. Not that night. The dinner did not recover. My aunt started clearing plates that weren't empty. My grandmother held my hand under the table without saying anything. My brother's girlfriend excused herself for water and didn't come back for 10 minutes. My father sat at the head of his table with his phone in both hands and said very little else. I drove home. The roads were quiet. For the first time in 4 years, there were no alerts on my phone about a business I did not own. My mother's texts started. Before I reached the highway, I was dramatic. I had embarrassed my father in front of his family. I was making everything about myself. The 7th text said my brother had always been reliable. None of them mentioned 4 years. None of them mentioned $400 a month. None of them said sorry. Monday morning, my CPA sent the confirmation. My name was off the IRS correspondence. The December quarterly would need a new authorized representative. My father called his accountant, and that call I heard about later from my aunt. The accountant carefully told my father that all recent filings had been prepared by me, that the IRS payment plan had been managed by me, and that he would need a new contact before the 15th. My father reportedly said, "What do you mean, Sabine? Her brother handles the finances." The accountant reportedly paused for a long time. The IRS notice arrived the following week, automated, impersonal, sent directly to the business address now that my forwarding preference was gone. My mother called me that afternoon. She was not yelling. She was frightened, which was almost harder to hear. She said she didn't know there was a payment agreement. She said she thought the IRS situation had been resolved years ago. She said she didn't know what the letter meant. I told her what it meant. I gave her the contact number and the agreement number she would need when she called. I did it in a flat, steady voice, and when I hung up, I sat on my kitchen floor with my back against the cabinet and stayed there for a while. My brother texted me that evening. The message said, "Hey, what's the accountant's email? Also, where do we log into the business bank account? I can't find it. Also, is there something going on with the IRS?" I read that message 4 times. The man my family had praised for years for running their company did not know how to log in to the business's bank account. He did not know there was an IRS situation. He did not know the accountant's name. I did not reply. The week that followed unfolded the way these things do, when a structure has been invisible, one absence at a time. The December payroll ran fine because I had made sure the existing cycle would complete before my access lapsed. There were employees who needed their checks, and none of them had done anything wrong. But the next cycle would need someone who actually knew the system, and that someone was not my brother. My mother left a voicemail on a Wednesday. I have saved it. Her voice was exhausted in a way I had never heard from her before. She said, "Your brother doesn't know how any of this works. I don't think he ever has." A pause. "I need you to tell me what to do, Sabine. I don't know who to call." She meant it as an accusation. I was withholding, I was punishing them. I heard it as something else entirely. For 4 years, this family had publicly credited my brother with work I had done, had told that story to relatives and clients and anyone who would listen. And now my mother's own voice, on a recording she made herself, was saying he had never known how any of it worked. The truth doesn't need your permission to exist, but sometimes it needs a voice. She gave it one. I saved the voicemail. I want you to understand why. Not for revenge. That word has never quite fit what I was doing. I saved it because the next time someone in that family opened their mouth to call me dramatic, the truth would already be standing in the room. My father called me on a Saturday, 2 weeks after Thanksgiving, earlier than he usually called. He asked if I could come by. I went, not because I'd softened, because some things need to be said face to face. He was at the kitchen table when I got there. No game on, no newspaper. He looked smaller than he had at Thanksgiving. He looked like a man who had spent 2 weeks doing math he hadn't expected to have to do. He didn't start with an apology. He started with a question. "Why didn't you tell me?" he said. "The money, the IRS, all of it. Why didn't you say something?" I sat down across from him. I did. In 2019, when I found the laundry basket, I showed you a spreadsheet. You said, "Handle it." He looked at the table. "And every year after that," I said, "you watched me handle it. You just didn't ask what handling it cost." A long quiet. Then he said something I hadn't expected. He said, "I knew it was you. I knew it wasn't your brother." He kept his eyes on the table. "I let him take the credit because it was easier, because you were sick and I didn't know how to." He stopped, tried again. "I didn't know how to look at you being sick. It felt like something I'd caused." I didn't say anything. I let the room hold it. "The stress," he said. "Your doctor said stress. And the year you got sick was the worst year for the company. The IRS thing, all of it." He finally looked up at me. "I knew you were carrying that." He did know. He had always known. And like my mother, he had found it easier to rewrite me, the difficult one, the dramatic one, the one leaning into her diagnosis, than to look directly at what it meant that his daughter's body had started failing in the same years she'd spent holding his company together. I understood it. Understanding it didn't fix it, but it gave the cruelty a shape I could finally stop being surprised by. I told him I was not taking the accounts back. He nodded. He didn't argue. I think by then he understood that the asking time was over. I helped him find a bookkeeper, a real one, licensed, paid by the company, no family strings attached. I made the introduction, handed off the files in a single organized folder, and walked out of that meeting with nothing on my phone that belonged to Carmody grounds. For the first time in 4 years, I was not the name anyone called when something went wrong. Someone else was. Someone they paid. Someone whose only relationship to my father was a contract. I looked at my auto-pay schedule the following month. The 2 transfers were gone. I sat there and calculated what 4 years of that came to, and I genuinely had to stand up and walk around my apartment for a minute before I could look at the number again. My brother and I don't talk now. He tried for a while to reframe things in the family group chat. I had overreacted. I had abandoned the company during a difficult season. I had made everything into a crisis. 2 cousins who'd been at the Thanksgiving table didn't buy it. My aunt sent me a message I've kept near the voicemail. I should have said something sooner. I could see what was happening. I'm sorry I didn't. I appreciated it, and I noticed it landed differently than it would have a year before. Being seen had stopped being the thing I was starving for. I had fed myself somewhere in the process of finally letting go. My father and I have dinner sometimes, not every month. Enough. He doesn't ask about the company. I don't ask him to account for the years. Some things don't get repaired, they get accepted for what they were, and you decide what the relationship looks like from a foundation that's finally honest. My mother and I are slower. She's a woman who's spent 40 years managing the image of this family, and images don't break gracefully. We talk. It's careful. It's more real than it was before, which is something. What I did with the money and the hours I got back. I joined a patient advocacy nonprofit 2 evenings a week, helping people with chronic illness navigate insurance paperwork. I bought the standing desk I'd been putting off for 2 years because I kept redirecting the money toward other people's problems. I started a sleep schedule. I let my body be the priority it should have been the whole time. My rheumatologist told me at my last appointment that my inflammatory markers were the lowest they'd been since diagnosis. He asked what changed. I told him I'd set some things down. He nodded, like a man who'd heard that answer before and was always glad when someone got there. My grandmother calls on Sunday mornings. She asks how I'm feeling and she means it, and she waits for the whole answer. She told me recently, in that direct way of hers, you were doing the work of 3 people for the love of 1 man who didn't know how to receive it. You deserved better than that. I hope you know that now. I'm getting there. They told me I was using my illness as an excuse. They said I wasn't pulling my weight, that I was dramatic, that I was making everything about myself. They said everything except what was actually true, which was that I was the one person's standing between their business and 4 years of consequences they had never had to face. They got the consequences. I got my life back. That's the trade, and I'd make it again. Welcome to Revenge Scenes. If you've ever been the one everyone leaned on and nobody saw, leave a comment. I want to know I'm not the only one. And subscribe, because every story we tell here is about the moment someone finally stopped explaining themselves. Take care of yourself, and if your name is on someone else's account, make sure it's there by choice.